Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, presented to you by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Tertiumquids.org is our web address. Next up, as promised, Zach Christensen, policy analyst with the Reason Foundation and their Pension Integrity Project. And you may say, well, that seems like a very specific thing to have a project dedicated to, but when you consider how many municipalities are bankrupt or are on the verge of dragging themselves into bankruptcy in their pensions, it certainly is an important issue for most of us. Zach, welcome back to the program. How are you doing, sir?
Oh, doing great, Joe. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's a problem that a lot of people aren't recognizing, aren't realizing is impacting their lives a lot in the amount of costs that are going into the amount of tax dollars that are increasing and having to go into these pension plans. And that's at a local level, state level, and a little bit at the national level as well.
And there are some misuses of these funds, and we'll get into that. But there are so many things in this tsunami, living longer, contracts. But it's like many things that we promise as a program. It sounds good at the onset until you actually try to put it into process, and you realize how many people are out there that are being paid by your government that aren't working for your government anymore. That it really, the math stops penciling out after a while under the promises often made by elected officials hoping to get reelected by saying, look at the great pension we have for our city workers or our state workers and things like that. So, it always sounds nice at the onset until you try to put it into practice.
No, that's an excellent point. Yeah, the problem with pension funding as we're experiencing it over the last couple of decades is just that it's ended up being a lot more expensive than anyone anticipated. In previous generations, it was easy just to fund them. There was very little risk with these, but what's ended up happening is just the returns on, the performance in the market hasn't been what it has been in the past. Mm-hmm. And basically that means that there's additional costs that are showing up, and it's growing and growing, and what basically that's going to be on the taxpayers' back for the most part. They're the ones that are going to have to pay the difference in the lost revenue that they haven't had, that they thought they would have.
Well, and then now we're in this democratic capitalism movement of we all want to vote for what businesses are permitted or should be targeted. We've seen it in some of our Virginia cities. We want you to remove all of our pension monies from this business, that business, or another business because it's not green. They make firearms or they're invested in the military or whatever politically correct hashtag you're applying there, thus restricting even where these pensions can go out to try to find stocks and investments that will help them grow.
Yeah, this is a growing, it's nothing new, but it seems like it is a growing movement that there's a lot of special interest groups trying to pressure these public pension boards to divest, to move their money, get it out of whatever particular interest, they're interested in. So for example, you'll see a lot of special interest groups trying to get state pensions out of, like you said, gun manufacturers, a lot of fossil fuel industries, private prisons, and there's several problems with that. First of all, when you divest a large fund like that, that comes at a huge cost. That could be a loss in revenue in the long run. Mm-hmm, in fact, California, CalPERS, the biggest pension plan in the nation, divested from tobacco industries in the early 2000s, and their own actuaries calculated that ended up costing them billions of dollars in the long run.
Wow! So
that can end up costing a ton of money, which once again, that's up to the taxpayer to come up with the difference for that for the most part. The other problem with that is it's very difficult for a pension board to make investment decisions that reflect the entire group of people that they're representing. Mm-hmm. They have funds in there from lots of people, hundreds of thousands of people, in the case of California, millions of people. You're not going to be able to come up with an investment strategy that matches exactly all of those people. So really, they're supposed to, as fiduciaries, they're supposed to be representing just the interests of the retiree. meaning that their benefits will be there.
Right. That's, and that is a very important point. As financial officers, they're not supposed to be worried about the politics of what the citizenry of some municipality says about the things they want or don't want their retirement funds invested in. And often you mentioned, the membership. This is sometimes not even the membership of the pension fund. These are the citizens that live around the pensioners that are saying, we don't want that invested on that. Really, becoming an even other wild card in the equation.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's a very complicated issue. Mm-hmm. One issue or one problem with all this is it's difficult to tell. I mean, all these investment decisions that are made by a pension board are very internal. So there's really no way for you and I to know what's in the hearts and minds of this pension board and why they're divesting or why they're moving on. So CalPERS, for example, when they divested from private prisons this year, it was actually a part of a larger group of companies that they with internal reports decided are too much of a risk. So they're saying it's not because of some political stance they're taking, but it's really just they see it as a higher risk. CalSTRS, on the other hand, the previous year made it very political and said this is a political decision we're making when they made the same divestment decision.
We're visiting with Zach Christensen, who studies pensions. It's the Reason Foundation's Pension Integrity Project. And you bring up a couple of issues there in the onset was obviously the trust factor. That somebody says, well, I'm going to perhaps make less money than I could in the private sector by working for my municipal government based on a certain number of years of service, and I will expect a pension for that as well, or with any company if you're told there's going to be a pension. But now you say there's another factor thrown into this, that these pension funds are becoming political, almost like political action committees. Tell us what's going on with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that seems to be increasingly a problem. We're noticing it more and more. So we're constantly advising against that, not to not get involved. Just don't dip into that water at all, because once you start moving in, once you adopt one policy, you're going to be pressured to adopt another policy, and you're going to be serving too many masters when in the long run, really, they're just supposed to be getting as the highest returns they could possibly get for their members at any one time. Yeah.
Hard enough to do. So you've written a piece. What sort of politics are some of these pension funds? Are they going after candidates specifically, or is it more issue advertising, or is it helping local political parties? What kind of politics are these pension funds getting into? We've certainly seen the problem with some of the like Teamsters unions and things like that in the pension funds. What are these government pensions doing?
Well, it seems to be mostly issue driven. I haven't seen any instances of them divesting from particular, using it to pressure specific candidates or anything like that. It seems to be mostly issue driven. So lots of different issues where a lot of the members, and the reasoning behind it, is for these special interest groups. They're saying we've paid money. This is our money, which is true. It is their money in the fund, and they're saying we don't want our money going towards this to gun manufacturers, or we don't want it to go into fossil fuels, and it doesn't match the priorities of the state or my own personal views. And so they're just using that as a way to say you need to make sure you're not investing in this particular thing. But like I said, it's you're going to have a tough time matching, getting your investment decisions to match the over 1 million members that in California that you're representing, and it's their money you're using. But once you're their fiduciary, really the only point of what you're doing is just making sure that you're getting the highest return. Mm-hmm. Basically, they depend on those returns. The returns that they're getting from year to year makes up about 2/3 of the benefits they've promised. So they need to make sure it's there. If there's any shortfalls, which is something that all states have been experiencing over the past couple of decades, you're going to end up with big shortfalls and big unfunded liabilities that need to be paid. over the next couple of decades.
Well, and we've seen that with a lot of pension funds without that being an issue. Zach, talk about how, and some of the big ones: Chicago, Detroit, New York. Certainly, Virginia's state pension fund has been a challenge for some time, despite some of the highest compensated state employees are in the directorate of it. How many and what is the direness of the situation? Give us a feel for how many municipalities are close to, and what should people be doing with their elected officials as we're getting ready for the Virginia General Assembly.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the underfunding problem is really something seen throughout the nation in every single state, and I'd say every single state except two. There's two states. Only two states have fully funded their public pension at this point. And that spread, that trickles down to all the municipalities, all the cities. You're going to see big shortfalls. Nationally, we're looking at about $1.5 trillion to $5 trillion in pension debt, depending on how you account for that, depending on how you discount it.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is about $12,000 per household, or that can go all the way up to $43,000 per household nationally. So we're talking a big chunk of money that's owed to public workers. It's going to have to be paid sooner or later. It's just the money isn't there right now. So they're going to have to come up with that money somehow. It's which, of course, creates tons of pressures. And those pressures are exacerbated at the local level where budgets are tight. And, basically what that means is they're going to have to create more. They need to come up with more money. Usually that's going to be through higher taxes. And what's the tragedy of it all is that most people locally are going to end up seeing their taxes go up in addition to services going down.
Right.
Because other sacrifices are going to have to be made elsewhere. So, that's how it's going to affect you personally, every single person personally. And of course, the severity of it differs depending on the city and state you're in. Of course, Illinois is kind of the problem child. They have the most issues. Virginia, isn't the worst, but it's still pretty bad. I believe they're about 75% funded, which means at the moment they only have 75 cents to the dollar of what they promised to public workers. So they're going to have to come up with a lot of money. $23 billion in debt is how much Virginia. So Virginia has $23 billion that they're going to have to come up with somehow.
And when you bring up the taxes, the pensioners are often going to be the ones facing this because they'll be at that point on a fixed income, and so higher taxes wherever it may come from, whether it be on a sales tax increase or a property tax increase, is going to hammer them the hardest.
Yeah, I mean, these retirees, their pension benefits are ironclad. It's usually protected in state constitution. So
Right.
for the most part, they will receive their benefits unless something catastrophic happens. Really, the difference in these unfunded liabilities, where they end up expressing themselves, is in tighter budgets locally and the state and higher taxes. And additionally, employees who are working currently, a lot of them are, in most states, they've seen an increase in their annual contributions. It's had to go up due to the higher costs that we've experienced.
What are some of the, you mentioned a couple of states are doing it okay. Can Virginia learn from, or any place learn from better places? Is it better privatization? Is it more portability? Is it allowing the municipal employees to do it themselves rather than count on a pension fund? What are some of the good cases where we could learn our lesson, I guess is the right phrase?
Yeah. I mean, there's a ton of great examples. What we do at the Pension Integrity Project, which I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but what we do is we work with policymakers and the public as well, and help people learn and know that there's a variety of solutions that you can find for your state or your city. We've found that each pension system is unique. There are unique problems for each one, and there's specific solutions for each that would work better than others. So there's lots of states. We've worked with several different states, and we've worked in Colorado and Arizona and Michigan, and we've found several methods that work to reduce costs in the long run. They also reduce risk. There's lots of different ways. Utah is a great example. They had a reform in 2010 where they created more options for new workers. So basically they created a new plan. So they didn't change the benefits for existing workers in any way, but all incoming new workers had a new plan that had much less risk involved. And they also had more options. So they had options to choose other types of retirement benefits. For example, instead of having a pension plan, they had the option of having a defined contribution plan, which is more portable. Like you mentioned, it's more portable for workers that really aren't planning on sticking around as long, and that tends to fit the more mobile work base that we have nowadays. So there's lots of different options. There's also ways you can de-risk. You can reduce the risk for the taxpayer and the state and the government simply by creating cost-sharing policies, which basically means that the risk is shared between the employee and the employer, the taxpayer and the worker equally. There's automatic adjustments. There's cash balance plans are another option. There's a lot of different. There's just a huge variety of options that you can go for, and it doesn't have to be one big reform all in 1 year. It can be a series of reforms. That's kind of what we've done in Arizona and Michigan. We've had 2 to 3 years of little baby steps each year to kind of get the pension plan moving in the right direction. So there's lots of options, just depending on what your specific situation is in your state.
And of course, the grandpappy of them all is hire fewer municipal employees and leave more to the private sector. But of course, that's you almost sound like some sort of heretic tilting at windmills when you say that.
Well, yeah, I mean those are always that's always a consideration as well, and that's something that has to be taken into account when a city is looking at cutting costs. Which pretty much all of them are having to do at this point due to these rising pension costs.
But it is a classic example of what happens when an economy collapses, and the idea that, all right, maybe the United States as a whole doesn't, but we've watched, you mentioned Illinois, Chicago, New York, where not just the economy collapses, but then external forces come in to operate it. Employees stop caring. I grew up in New York City during the days of the monthly sanitation strikes and the invention of something called the blue flu, where all of a sudden half the police department would just all of a sudden get sick because they were in the middle of a contract negotiation but weren't permitted to strike for obvious reasons. So you see all these things happen when a municipality fails to do just the basics, like you said, which is make sure that these benefits continue to grow.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I found one way I like to frame a lot of this is that a big problem that has caused what we're dealing with now is just a misallocation of responsibility and risk. So basically, like we've seen in Illinois, it's the politicians and the policymakers. It's really difficult to ask them to fix something that's going to affect the state, 20, 30 years down the road. Right. Especially when it's something that's going to cost them a lot of money and a lot of political capital as well. So, it's really difficult. Well, a lot of our suggested policy is kind of reallocating that, making sure that the responsibility is in the right place and that there's accountability as well for, mismanagement and those types of things.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And you can read his stuff, reason.org. Zach Christensen, thank you so much. Their pension reform, the pension integrity project, and they have a newsletter that comes out. And please, the Virginia retirement system is just one of many. But I appreciate your time this week, and I hope you have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you, Joe. You too.
And thank you for tuning in this week to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. As we said, this is all up on our YouTube channel, Freedom and Prosperity on YouTube. And, of course, you can read more about our Tuesday morning group coalition meetings and more of our advocacy work, especially as this very, very different General Assembly is going to convene in January. Find out more at tertiumquids.org. For all of us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, I'm Joe Thomas. Till next weekend, so long, and thanks for all the fish.